Good afternoon. This is Trish with Hip Homeschool Moms. I'm here with Zan Tyler and with Mike Farris, and we are going to be talking about constitutional literacy. So I'm going to let Zan introduce you, and I think her husband's getting ready to put his lower third on so we know who he is sitting there. Okay, Zan, your
Okay.
turn.
Well, it's not very often that you have the privilege in life to introduce one of your real life heroes, but Mike is one of my real life heroes. He kept me out of jail. He taught me how to lobby. He is just a remarkable person. He has lived what he's preached and preached what he lives. He has a wonderful wife, Vicki. They have 10 children and 17 grandchildren. And most of you will know him as the founder of Homeschool Legal Defense Association and also the founder of Patrick Henry College. And he's an expert in constitutional law. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, welcome, y'all. I'm excited about this. Mike is a hero of mine too, so we're going to have a big fan club going on. Mike, is that okay?
Oh, that's just fine. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Okay,
Trish, one
so
of the things we had talked about was just what was the impetus for this
mhm.
particular Google Hangout. Mike, will you hand me that book right there?
Sure.
Mike has a 25-part series on constitutional literacy. And so we have, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see the cover?
Sure can.
We have just come out with a book. He has just come out with a workbook that accompanies the DVD series. It's fabulous. The inside is fabulous, and but it's to make the DVDs more accessible to 7th through 12th graders, and also it allows you to use it in a homeschool for a high school credit. But the main thing it does, it will give your kids a real passion and knowledge of the Constitution.
That's wonderful. We are so excited about that, Mike. So, why don't you tell us how did you get so involved in? I know you're a lawyer, obviously,
Right.
but how did constitutional literacy? How did this particular topic become such a passion of yours?
Well, it starts a long time ago, actually. I was a flaming moderate when I was about 19 or 20 years old. And when I enrolled in constitutional law from a man named Dick S. Payne at Western Washington University back in 1971, he changed my view of politics and a whole lot of other things by teaching me the original meaning of the Constitution. And it really changed my life in a lot of important ways. And so about 20 years ago or something like that, when maybe 22 years ago, when my oldest two girls were in high school, I wanted to do for them what Dr. Payne had done for me. And so I created my first version of a constitutional law program for homeschool kids, my own kids. And eventually that program grew, and I've written two versions of a high school textbook. And I got a lot of requests from parents that they wanted to be able to learn about the Constitution in a little more accessible way where they didn't have to sit down and read a whole bunch of Supreme Court cases and do all that work. And so I created the video series because I'm convinced that unless America knows how the principles of liberty are supposed to work, we aren't going to have a free country. And we don't have to have everybody in America. God always works in remnants. And I believe that we need to train up a remnant that understands the principles of freedom by understanding the principles of the Constitution. And so it's just been a desire to grow the accessibility of these ideas to more and more people. And so that led to the video series, and then that led to the book series, because it just allows more people to learn the truth of the Constitution. And I really have, basic objective of getting people mad. So that they'll get involved and want to change things.
Well, that's it's terribly interesting how our paths crossed here because I actually had started the Tea Party in my little county outside of Memphis, Fayette County, and I was not terribly knowledgeable about the Constitution, and I think a lot of Americans are not knowledgeable about the Constitution. And so, why do you think that is? What has happened? Why has America become so uninterested in our rights and our liberties, and how do we change it?
Well, I think that people are interested in the abstract. People, you do any kind of survey. Do people respect and believe in the Constitution. You'll get overwhelmingly popular numbers for the Constitution. But if you put an objective test in front of people and ask them, about limited powers and separations of powers and what does the Commerce Clause mean and how much power does the president have to make law through executive orders and so on, people will just start failing immediately once you put some actual content on the table. And the reason is we just haven't been training people. Public schools don't train people in the Constitution. Christian schools are a little better perhaps, but you really need to know three things to know the Constitution. You need to know what the text says, you need to know what it originally meant, and you need to know what the Supreme Court has done to those various provisions, like the Commerce Clause, for example. And you got to compare the original text and meaning to what the Supreme Court says and see the disparity. That's what you have to do to really understand what's going on. And when you see those three things, people's eyes come open because they say, I understand what it meant, I understand what it says, but look at what the Supreme Court's done to us. And when you get that disparity in your head, you're a changed person.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tricia. I'm sorry.
One question I do have, and we're going to step on each other, but because we're so excited about this product, do you cover the Founding Fathers and some of the original intent in this series? I assume you do.
We cover it in every session.
Good.
It's not something you study once because it's not the original intent or the original meaning of the Constitution in an abstract, general sense. It's phrase by phrase. What's the original meaning of the Commerce Clause? What's the original meaning of the free exercise of religion? What's the original meaning of the Second Amendment? And so on. You need to understand the original meaning in every section, not just some general theory of the Constitution or something like that. In fact, the general theory kind of original understanding isn't really particularly helpful because it makes the Constitution an abstraction. You really need to know that it's law and that each phrase has real meaning and that we should really follow that real meaning in case after case, in section after section. So it's drilling down into the details. It's the only way to understand the Constitution. It's okay to understand some of the big ideas, but really it's the details that, the devil's in the details of this, and it really matters.
Mm-hmm. Dan?
One question I have for you, Mike, is this. As social conservatives, a lot of us will look at this and get excited about the impact on the pro-life issues or Common Core or parental rights, but explain to me why we should care about the Commerce Clause and other parts of the Constitution that we sometimes don't view as important but are essential to our liberties as Americans.
Well, to really explain that, I need to give you a basic lesson in constitutional law, so here goes. The constitutional law courses that I've always taught are divided into two sections. It's not unique to me. This is a normal way of doing it. The first half of any constitutional law course is is the authority of the government, because when the government acts without authority, then it's acting unconstitutionally. And so we need to know what the authority is. And the founders thought this principle is so important. They didn't even put the Bill of Rights in the original Constitution. Our rights were added on in 1791. The whole idea of the original Constitution was to grant very limited powers to the government and to have grants of power and limits of power, checks and balances, separation of powers. And if we're going to protect our liberty, we have to have a robust understanding and a robust view of what the government is supposed to be able to do. In fact, the most important question that you can answer about government or the Constitution really is this: what's the purpose of government? And if you answer that question correctly, then you get a whole lot right. If you answer that question wrongly, then you get a whole lot wrong. And so the most important division of the Constitution is you have to use the authority granted in the Constitution. That's part one. And part two is you can't use the authority in a way that violates the rights of the people. So both things are important, but most of us forget about the authority issue and go straight to the rights of the people. But that's given up a whole bunch, and the reason we have a runaway government is that people have been paying attention to the first half of this.
I agree. I agree 100%. And as a matter of fact, you bring up a point that you didn't use the language, but I hear it all the time, and it's something I think is an extremely dangerous discussion, is that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. That's pretty scary.
Well, yeah, and it's also a fraud. Um,
Hmm.
the idea that the Constitution is a living, breathing document is a way for judges to say, we get to change the meaning of the Constitution to what we want it to mean. And so the most important rule in any organization is who has the power to make the rules. And that's true of whether it's the National Football League or the student council at Patrick Henry College or Congress or the UN. The most important rule is who has the power to make the rules. And if the people who wrote and ratified the Constitution have the power to define what the terms of the Constitution are, then we have one way of government. That's a constitutional republic. But if judges get to make the meaning of the Constitution, then we have tyranny. Because when unelected people, somebody besides the legislators that are authorized to make law, are in fact making law, then we're living under a tyranny. And the whole idea of a living constitution is just simply a joke. It only means one thing. Judges get to make up and say what they think the Constitution means today rather than what it was written.
Well, isn't that really happening though? I mean, with the way when I watched your parental rights, I actually spent some time studying that one, and with them now you were talking about Scalia and some of the things that
Right.
Scalia has said in some of his decisions. He is setting precedent, and that precedent is essentially or could potentially change the meaning of what the Constitution says by precedent.
It happens more often than it doesn't happen. In fact, I would say, at least 80% of the Supreme Court decisions, and that's being very generous and
Mm.
lowballing it, are drinking of this theory where the judges get to change the meaning of the Constitution. When people have been through my constitutional law, the whole course at the college level, I think that we probably study maybe 150 cases. And there's probably 6 of them that follow the original meaning of the Constitution. And so
Wow.
that's a pretty fair ratio. It is dominated by living constitutionalism, where judges are just making stuff up out of thin air.
Well, something that really, for me, having been involved at a low level, just, literally local level, trying to make an impact, something that really shocked me was how many people, besides everyday Americans, that don't know the Constitution. But when you start talking to legislatures and, the people that are in the position to make decisions and to vote for us and supposedly look out for our rights, they don't know it either.
It's worse than that. Judges don't know it. Most lawyers don't know it. I was a bar examiner in Washington State and wrote up a very straightforward religious freedom question for the bar exam that year. Over half potential lawyers didn't even recognize that there was a free exercise of religion problem posed in the case when the facts of the case were a church was padlocked and the pastor was arrested for the content of his preaching, and they didn't even see the issue, much less discuss it correctly. And so constitutional illiteracy is rampant, and at the highest levels it's rampant. It is worse than you can imagine, which is also a very good opportunity. The
Exactly.
more people the more people understand the real meaning of the Constitution, we have a strategic advantage. I remember when I ran for lieutenant governor of Virginia, I was interviewed by the Washington Post editorial board, and they would argue with me about everything that we were talking about. And when we got to the issue of abortion, and I explained to them how the original meaning of the Constitution on the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, where it says no person shall be denied life without due process of law, how unborn children were considered persons in the meaning of the law in 1868 when that was written. They didn't argue with me. They didn't agree with me, but they didn't know how to answer me. It was just the most wonderful moment when I just shut up the Washington Post editorial board by explaining the original meaning of the Constitution. they could not answer. And so when we know it, it puts it at a great advantage, because most people want to believe in the Constitution. And when people can stand up and explain it in a really simple, straightforward fashion as to why the 14th Amendment is already a pro-life amendment, and explain why the word person in 1868 did include unborn children, it's really simple. Anybody can understand this. This is not something that is so complex that ordinary people can't get it. I've been teaching this for a long, long time to 14 to 18-year-olds. They get it just fine. And so, in fact, I once had one of my constitutional law exams I was grading on an airplane, and the Solicitor General of the United States, who was a professor at Duke University Law School, and he was Solicitor General under one of the Democrat presidents, argues in front of the Supreme Court all the time. I gave him the final exam answer I had from a high school homeschool kid, and he thought it was a law school exam. He just he just said, this is brilliant stuff. Who wrote this? And I told him, it was a high school homeschool kid. And he goes, that's unbelievable. Our kids can get this. This is not that hard. But it's taking a complex subject, making it easily understandable in bite-sized chunks, and it turns our kids around. In fact, my favorite story in this regard recently, I got a letter from a mom. A 14-year-old boy watched this section of this video series on the Fourth Amendment, on searches and seizures. The police showed up at his house because somebody had dialed 911 by accident. They were trying to call area code 910 and just hit the wrong button. And when you do a hang-up on a 911 call, somebody comes out to see if you're okay. And they wanted into the house because the parents weren't there. And the boy said, no, you have to have a warrant, you have to have probable cause. He went through it all because he'd watched this video. And he said, he followed the advice I gave on the video, saying, if you're in this situation, bring the kids out to the front porch, let them look, see everything is okay, and then take them back inside. He did exactly what I told him. And the police said, oh, I see everything's in charge here, it's okay, and they walked away. These are things that our kids can learn. In fact, the parents can learn it as well. And it's easy to learn, not difficult material, but it's profound in its impact.
You mentioned 14 to 18. Is that the demographic, the age that you're targeting? Can it go lower? You tell me.
It can. The material I've been teaching for a long time was aimed at a bit higher level. But this new product, the video series, is aimed at everybody. I've had little kids watch it. I've had lawyers watch it. So if lawyers can watch it, anybody can get it. But the workbook that goes with the video is aimed at 7th grade and up, and so it's accessible. If we tried to read all the Supreme Court cases, which we're not doing in this workbook, then you need to be about at about a junior and college level of reading, which is the average 14-year-old homeschool kid. But this is accessible.
Okay, that's wonderful. Zan, I know you've been really involved with the development of this, so anything you'd like to share in addition?
Well, the thing that I'm so excited about is just putting this truth into the hands of our young people, because I know our young people are going to be the freedom fighters for tomorrow, and we want them fighting for the right things. We don't want them to be duped. We want them to have good analytical skills. And boy, I think this 25-part DVD series might just hits it out of the park for homeschool parents and homeschool kids. And then we hope that the workbook will be a tool where the kid can interact with the material on his own or on her own, do some thinking through the issues, answer some tough questions, do a little bit of research, and really reinforce what we're trying to do with this whole constitutional literacy approach. I love what Mike talks about, this being a revival of liberty. Mm-hmm. And with homeschooling, that's what we've really been after. And along those lines, Mike, I would love for you to discuss for a few minutes just parental liberty, your involvement in parental liberty, the whole problem with international law, and how this curriculum, your DVD series and workbook, will address all of those things a little bit.
Wow. Okay. Well, when we look at our individual rights, which parental liberty is one of the individual rights that are important to us, you have to understand that the Supreme Court has artificially divided our rights into two categories: fundamental rights and creatively named non-fundamental rights. It's kind of like aspirin and non-aspirin. And so the difference between fundamental rights and non-fundamental rights is that the burden of proof is always on the government, and it's a very heavy burden of proof in any case involving fundamental rights. In any case involving non-fundamental rights, the burden of proof is always on the individual to prove that the government's in the wrong. And just the way the rules of evidence are set up to work in these two different categories, the net effect is the individual has a far greater chance of winning a fundamental rights claim than he or she does of winning a non-fundamental rights claim. And so the real debate on parents' rights is, are these fundamental rights or are these non-fundamental rights? And this is made more difficult by the fact that parents' rights were not in the text of the Constitution. And the reason they weren't in the text of the Constitution is the founders never imagined a government of any kind, either the state level or the national level, that would ever start making decisions that would get in between parents and their kids. They didn't think of a government, the kind of social welfare government that has that propensity to get between parents and children wasn't in anybody's mind. And the various provisions that we see in the Bill of Rights were listed because they had some experience with problems in those areas. So they responded to problems either they knew or they knew from history, but they didn't have any historical examples that were, right in front of them that would say parents' rights need to be written down in the text of the Constitution. So they didn't. And so because parental rights are unwritten, and because there's this confusion between fundamental rights and non-fundamental rights, and because there's a shift in our society toward a more statist direction where they believe that government is the solution to all problems, rather than God and families and churches and individuals are the solution to problems, they want to believe that parental rights are non-fundamental. And the Supreme Court in 2000, in the case of Troxel versus Granville, actually ruled in favor of the parents in that case, but split 6 different ways and just put parental rights into absolute confusion. And so as a result of that, the lower courts have gone nuts on this issue, and the vast majority of decisions since 2000 have held, at the federal level at least, have held that parental rights are not fundamental rights, which means parents lose. So when you see the Peltier case in Massachusetts and the intervention that they're doing for that girl there in the medical situation, what you see is parents' rights being treated as a non-fundamental right. Now, I litigated very, very similar case in Michigan about 2 years ago compared to the Peltier case. It was a medical case involving cancer. The difference was Chris Klicka and I had written a parental rights statute for Michigan in 1994, and it passed. And so when we were litigating in Michigan, they had a statute on the books that said parental rights are to direct the upbringing, education, and care of your child is a fundamental right. And with that statute in place, it was pretty easy to win that case, which we did. And Jacob wasn't being controlled by the doctors and the social workers. He was being controlled by his parents, which is the way it should have worked. So, that difference is a huge difference. Now, Zan asked about international law and how does this work into the whole deal? It applies because there are a series of treaties, the biggest of which is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but pertinent also are the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also the UN Women's Treaty, CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. All 3 of those treaties affect parents and children, but the biggest is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Mm-hmm. And in all of those treaties, there's a general theory of the relationship between parents and children and the government. And that theory is stated in this simple sentence: the best interest of the child shall control in every case. And people ask, well, what is the best interest of the child? And it's actually the wrong question. The question is,
Who determines it?
Who determines? Because that's what it means. It's a term of art that's 400 years old, and it's a legal term that means when the government gets to decide what's best for the child, and that's what it means. And so in our law today, and historically in our country at least, the law has been that parents get to decide what's best for the child until such time that the parents have been proven in court to have harmed the child, either by abuse or neglect or abandonment or something in that area. You have to have proof of harm. And when there's proof of harm, then there's breach between the parent and the child relationship, and then the rules change. And then the government does have some rights, sometimes limited rights, sometimes more total rights, depending on the degree of harm. And so, but in these treaties, the government has the right to intervene in every single case. And Scotland has just voted to implement this at the ultimate level. They've appointed a guardian for every single child in Scotland at birth.
That. That's crazy. How do they do that? How do they even have enough people to do that?
I don't know. I guess they're going to import people from Mexico. I don't know. I don't know where they're going to get them. And so well, obviously they're going to have caseloads. They have social workers with a caseload, and which tells you he'll only intervene in the lives of families that he doesn't like. And conservative Christians are probably among the leading people that people like that won't like. So I mean, that's where we're going to. And now, how will that happen in this country? Under our Supremacy Clause in Article 6 of the Constitution, it says that all treaties ratified by the United States are part of the supreme law of the land. Right. And so when we have a ratified treaty, that takes precedence over all forms of law except the written Constitution. And we don't have parents' rights in the written Constitution. It's only an implied right from history. And so the case law is from the Supreme Court that implied rights don't count, that treaties trump implied rights. And so it's an incredibly dangerous scenario that we're in, because the left knows that they can use international law to accomplish things that they would never be able to get through the political process in this country, like banning spanking, for example. There's no way that this not been banned in California or Massachusetts or New York or any place. It's still legal to spank your kids in a modest, appropriate way in all 50 states. But if this treaty comes through, spanking will be banned every place, not because the legislators of those states voted for it, but because a treaty is imposing that on the whole country. Now, when people understand this, they're motivated to action. And that's the whole point of the whole series, is I want to motivate people to action, including kids. I just read in the paper this morning, actually on the internet this morning, a 17-year-old girl in West Virginia just won the Republican nomination in a heavily Republican district in West Virginia. She's going to be 18 before the final election, so she's old enough to actually serve in the legislature. But she's 17 years old, and she beat an incumbent legislator campaigning on constitutional rights, campaigning on the Second Amendment and on pro-life and other things. And so she's a public school kid. I mean, so if she can do it, our homeschool kids can do this as well. When people understand the principles of liberty and understand what the threat of international law is, and understand why parents' rights have been put in a second-class rights status, when you can start explaining these things, you can win elections. And this, one of my former students did the same thing, ran for the state legislature when he was 18 years old in New Hampshire, and he got elected. And because of the course he had taken from me, one high school course, they put him on the Judiciary Committee in the New Hampshire legislature, where he was the resident expert on the Constitution. And there were a bunch of lawyers on the committee, but they turned to this high school kid, or well, I guess he had just graduated, this 18-year-old kid, as the constitutional expert. So I hate to tell you this, but I may turn some of your kids into legislators.
Well, you know what? Honestly, I do believe that our future is dependent upon the next generation. So, because we're so close, we're right on that precipice of, like you were talking about earlier about the parental rights and how it's become an implied right instead of a fundamental right, and we're just sitting on the precipice of some big things happening. And so, I am praying that the next generation of children are going to be the ones that pull it back out from the precipice. But I have so many more questions I could ask you that I want to ask you that I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to go and ask the questions that everybody else is asking you. But like ConCon, we've heard, I'm not going to say it, don't even go there. But that, I have heard so many things about how a ConCon is dangerous. And yet we're talking about possibly changing the Constitution to add a parental rights. And so that's a conversation, Mike. We need to have another hangout. How's that?
Sure, I'd be
Okay.
glad to do that.
Okay, well, I'm
By
going
the
to
way,
hold you to it.
but nobody is proposing a ConCon, just so you
Okay.
know.
Okay. Okay.
There's a big difference, and people need to get their history from the original documents, not from the Common Core. And this video series teaches everybody the answer to the question of, was the Constitution adopted as a result of an illegal runaway convention? Because anybody that thinks they're a constitutionalist but yet thinks the Constitution was adopted as a result of an illegal runaway convention is schizophrenic, frankly.
Right.
Because it's like believing that George Washington was a great American hero, but at the same time, you know what, he's also... So you can't have it both ways. You have to believe in the integrity of the Constitution. And it's not a belief just based on wishing and hoping. When you read the actual facts, when you know the actual history, we can learn that the Constitution was adopted with 100% integrity. They did it exactly the right way. There was no runaway, and we don't need to be afraid of a runaway today.
Good. Okay, so that's the part right there you just hit, that I've heard so many people say, you need to be worried about that. But okay, I'm going to ask the questions that everybody else is asking. One question we have is this for, it says the 7th through the 12th grade high school, but can you get credit for it? Is this a high school credit course? From what I read, this is a supplement, right? Or is it now considered a credit?
The combination of the video and the workbook together is worthy of a high school credit.
Yay! That's great news. Wonderful. Sharon, that answered your question. So Sharon had asked that. Okay, the next question is, I have an almost, and I'm reading questions as they're submitting them. So Mike, we're flying by the seat of our pants.
Okay.
It says, Paige said, I just ordered the 25-part DVD series. My oldest child is almost 9. He's very verbal, very good with Latin. Can he use the workbook curriculum which is about to come out? Or will that curriculum be too advanced for him? You were just talking about...
Well, there probably is a 9-year-old someplace that can do it. He's going to be the... Tell what I'm sure we have some sample chapters up on the Apologia website, and so I would just simply go look at the sample chapters and see if that reading level corresponds with your child's abilities. If it does, great.
That's great. That's good. That's good advice right there. Okay, the next one is about Common Core. Do we want to go there?
Sure.
Okay, it says Common Core is a topic I would love to do another entire series on. As a matter of fact, Hip Homeschool Moms is going to be doing several series on the Common Core, and one of the writers that actually writes for HSLDA has already agreed. She's been guest posting, I guess, for y'all. She's going to be one of the folks that we interview. But briefly, can you explain how Common Core could ultimately lead to a national curriculum and how that's unconstitutional?
Well, I would say that Common Core is a national curriculum. I mean, we're there. And here's the constitutional problem with this whole thing. This is a misuse of the General Welfare Clause. Am I still alive? Here we go.
You are.
Okay. Okay. The General Welfare Clause is the means that Congress has used to give money to the states and then to say, states, if you want to take this money that we took from your taxpayers, you've got to do what we tell you to do. And in this case, that is, adopt the Common Core. And so they're bribing the states to do the will of Congress. And why this is a violation of the Constitution is that, first of all, the General Welfare Clause doesn't give them the authority to do that kind of spending in the first place, because the main rule of the General Welfare Clause is this: if the states can spend money on it, the federal government can't. So since the states can spend money on education, the federal government can't. So all federal education spending, not counting schools for the military bases or schools in the District of Columbia, but any federal spending for education in the 50 states, all of that is unconstitutional. But it's also unconstitutional for these mandates, because that's a violation of the Republican Guarantee Clause. Because the Republican Guarantee Clause is this: legislators in the states are supposed to do the will of the voters in the states. And what they're doing instead is legislators in the states are doing the will of Congress. And so it's not just that the Common Core or a national curriculum is unconstitutional. Whenever Congress is telling the state legislators to do their will, that entire program is unconstitutional. So it's not. This isn't an isolated instance of unconstitutionality. There are hundreds and hundreds. In fact, there's thousands of programs like this, and every single one of them are a violation of the principle of a Republican form of government.
Do you discuss Common Core in the series?
I think so, but I certainly discussed the principles I just talked about. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Because the Common Core is an example of a problem. It's not the whole problem.
Right. It's just a symptom of. I agree. But I'm so excited about the foundation that's being laid for students, because this is something that even when I was involved a couple of years ago, there was really nothing out there for us that are lay people to help us wrap our arms around and understand what's happening today. So this is a great curriculum that I'm actually recommending to adults too. So,
well, I mean, there are Tea Party groups that have used this curriculum all over the country. I mean, they've been using the video series, and I've been asked by adults as well for supplemental materials. And so there's no reason in the world that you can't have adults studying this material. In fact, there's very good reason why they should study the material, frankly. They'll be better citizens. And, Tea Party groups ask me regularly, can we show this to our Tea Party groups? And I said, well, as long as you're not charging admission, you can show it up to 1 million people. After you've shown it to 1 million, come ask me again, and I'll give you permission for the second million. But yeah, I mean, I want to save the liberty of this country, so I want as many people as possible to use this material and to understand. It really does boil down to really simple ideas. When you understand that if the states can spend money on it, the federal government can't, everybody gets that. And that's what the original meaning of the Constitution is.
Well, I'm excited. I really think that this is going to be a product that can change a lot of understanding of about where America is right now and how dangerous it is.
Trish, not to interrupt you, but I learned so much just from going through the process of reading the workbook myself. And, simple things that we don't teach our children that Mike brings out so clearly, little things like the individual can't violate the Constitution. Only the government can, or the people who have been given power by the government. And that our rights aren't given to us by government, they're protected by government, but they're given to us by God. And they're very simple things that are really life-changing and freedom-changing in his series and in the workbook. And I'm really excited about it too.
Trish, if I could just add one more thing about the Common Core. The young man that is a graduate of Patrick Henry College that did all the video work for my Constitutional Literacy series is also the same young man that made the Common Core movie that HSLDA put out. And so I would encourage everybody to go look at that movie. It's called, the website is commoncoremovie.com. And so just go, or go into HSLDA's website, hslda.org/Common Core. We have tons of resources on Common Core.
Well, I know it's a really hot topic right now, and I think that there's some misunderstandings, and I think there's lots of opportunity to educate homeschoolers, especially right now, because I think they're the ones that are so scared of it. So I really would love to have you back to talk about that. But Zan, tell us about the last part. One question that everybody keeps asking is, are we going to create a workbook that's going to go to the lower level students? So,
Well,
Mike, you up for
we
it?
sure would love to if Mike's up for it.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would tell you right now, though, this isn't an Apologia product, and I apologize for not selling Apologia, but there's a book that I've been encouraging people to read for a long, long time, aimed at lower age kids. It's
Okay.
called Why America's Free, and it's published by Mount Vernon. George Washington's home, which is not a government organization. Private people own George Washington's home. They have effectively a national park, but it's a private national park. And they produce this book. And I know the author. He's a very good man and a terrific historian, PhD from the Ivy League, and is a really good man. And it is aimed at third, fourth, and fifth graders, teaching them the principles of liberty by understanding the founding generation. It's the 50 years of, basically 1750 to 1800 that you learn from that. And it's a terrific book. When I was first reading it in an airplane, I started crying. And so the story of George Washington resigning his commission just absolutely got my heart. And it's a great resource. It's not as broad as what we would potentially want to do, but it's a good start. It's a good, sampler until we can get our product on the market for the younger kids.
There you go, guys. Y'all just heard it here first, right? Zane, you're going to hold him to it, right?
That's right. We're going to hold him to it.
Okay. Well, I know you have a presentation you're supposed to be doing, and I do not want to step on anybody's toes. Does anybody know what time Mike is supposed to go live over the? They are live at Teach Them Diligently right now in Washington, D.C., and I know he has a presentation coming up. We're not stepping on that, are we?
No, I have 18 more minutes.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, so the last question, you're going to laugh, Mike. You brought it up, so you get it.
Okay.
You mentioned kids becoming legislators.
Yeah.
How does one do that?
Okay. Well, the way you do it is you get involved. And kids can get involved in elections early. One of my favorite stories is from a state legislator in Illinois named Penny Pullen, who was in the state senate there for a long time. And she had an 11-year-old homeschool boy who was her precinct captain. And what a precinct captain does is you go from door to door in the precinct and you ask people if they know who they're going to support for whatever offices it is you're working on. And so in this case, for Penny Pullen's state senate seat. And so he identified the people that are for her, and then the people that were against her, and then the people that didn't know. And so he got literature to people who didn't know, and he gave encouragement to the people who were for her, wrote them all down, and on election day, he made sure that all the people that were either neutral or for Penny turned out to vote, and went knocked on their doors again. She told me that the highest vote precinct she ever had, any precinct she ever had, was that precinct that 11-year-old boy worked. Now, the record was beat 2 years later when that same boy was 13 and did it again. And so, that's the advanced form of doing this. If you have a kid that does that when they're 11 years old, and they're studying the Constitution, and they're reading the newspaper, and they're reading a magazine, and they're doing the kinds of things to know what's going on. Because basically what a leader needs to know is this: what the Constitution of our country and our state say. What were we trying to get at? And then you say, what's going on today? And you compare those two things, and you see where the problems are. And then you say, I want to remedy the problems. I want to return our country from being not governed by the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court, but to be governed by the Constitution as written. And when you get that idea in your head, it's not a complicated idea. you're ready to be a leader. And you can be ready to be a leader when you're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Isn't that fabulous? That's wonderful. What a great story. That is a great story. Okay, so Zan, do you have anything you want to close it out with?
Well, I think for us as homeschooling parents, it's really incumbent on us to teach and train our kids these principles. And if we want our children to be involved, I think we need to be involved in the lives of candidates who are doing a good job. We need to know what our representatives and congressmen stand for, and we need to model for them what it looks like to be a good citizen. I know that my boys and my daughter joined us in the fight as Mike helped us lead it in South Carolina. And them growing up in the courtroom in the State House was really a training ground for them. And I would say that they're each freedom fighters, that they're a member of this, a part of this revival in their own right. So as homeschooling becomes easier and easier, we can't just lay down the gauntlet. As homeschooling parents, we've got to remember how important it is for us to teach our children the principles of liberty that we find in Scripture and that we find in the Constitution. And I think we'll forever be beholden to Mike for leading us down the right road on that.
And there's a story there about you not getting arrested. We need to hear that next time.
It's a good story. It's got a good ending. Wasn't fun at the time.
And I agree, Zan. I think that we model it. You know, just like me being involved. I'm not involved anymore in the Tea Party, but I was at that time. And I think that my kids now know how committed I am to learning about and knowing what our legislatures are doing. Legislature representatives are doing. One thing that actually bothered me was they would say one thing and vote differently.
Yes.
And nobody cared what their voting record was. So that just frustrated me to no end. So.
You know, I have to share this one story with you, one of my favorite Mike stories, because it impacted my son so much. I have a son who's an attorney, and John grew up watching Mike litigate some cases, and especially one in the Supreme Court in South Carolina that just really got his attention and was one of the reasons I think he later on became a lawyer. But once he started practicing, he called me up and he said, "Mom, I had a great experience today as an attorney. I was able to pray with one of my clients, and I'd always heard Mr. Farris talk about how he prayed with his clients, and I have always longed to do that, and today I had that happen." So, you know, Mike, it really does show the power of example and the power of a life well lived, and Mike has touched so many of our lives on so many different levels.
I know. Even those that don't even know you. You've impacted. So
I appreciate all that. I'm just checking to make sure I'm still alive and this isn't my funeral. So
pinch him, somebody. Somebody go there and pinch him. Okay. Well, we have certainly enjoyed this, and Mike, I really do. I would love to do another call with you about where we stand in America right now, and about Common Core and parental rights and all the things that really are such hot topics right now. We'd love to do that. But in the meantime, guys, go over to the Apologia site, check out the books, check out Constitutional Literacy, and we're actually going to be doing a review on it, Mike, for Hip Homeschool Moms. So one of us over here will be enjoying it here. I guess is it out now, Zan? Is it
It's out. We had them drop shipped to the conference, and we'll be able to start selling them next week, I believe. Next week. Yep.
Very
and so,
good.
Trish, we want to thank you too for hosting us today and giving us this forum, giving Mike this forum to talk about his passions.
Oh, we're excited. We really are. There are several of us over here that are competing to try to get that review. So there may be a knockdown drag out of Hip Homeschool Mom. So
I think we can arrange for several of you to have it.
Oh, you're going to save the owners' lives over here. Well, thank you guys. Have a wonderful conference. Thank you so much for your information, Mike. I'm telling you what, there's so much for us to catch up on, and we really do appreciate you being here and sharing with us. And we appreciate this product. This is a fantastic product that's going to help our next generation become the leaders they need to be.
Thank you, Trish. I really appreciate all the kindness.
It's great. Okay, y'all, have a great conference, and thank you for your time. And if y'all have questions, leave them here, and we'll try to round Mike up again and see if we can't get these answered.
Great.
Y'all have a good time.
Thanks, Trish.
Bye-bye.